Holy crap and a cracker. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing a 5x5 about cults. Alright, before I get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what is the best book you've ever read regarding cults. So we are going to be doing a 5x5. If that is new to you, this is a series on my channel in which I am trying to find 5-star reads revolving around a single theme. Thus far I have not succeeded, but I'll put a link to my previous tries in the cards up above. Like I said, this time around we're focusing on cults. I've always found cults very interesting, and especially when I started to add more of them onto my TBR, that's when I realized this is the perfect theme for a 5x5 in October time, because I mean, cults are pretty creepy, and I would definitely say a majority of the books I have planned are going to fall in somewhat of a horrific genre. As for the layout of this video, I'm going to give you a summary of the book followed by a 50% update with an estimated rating, and then an update at the end of the book with a final rating. Here's hoping we might have good luck with this one. So starting out, the first book I read for this video was Just Like Mother by heltzel. I don't like dolls. This story is following our main character, Maeve, who actually grew up in this mother's cult. She was raised almost as a sister to her cousin, Andrea. Though Maeve has spent majority of her life trying to distance herself from this cult, recently she's run back into Andrea, and she finally feels like she might have a little bit of family that she can reconnect with. They start picking at her about her single lifestyle, and particularly shaming her for the fact that she doesn't really want to be a mom. Unfortunately though, Maeve feels like Andrea is the one true friend who can really understand what she's been through in her life, but maybe bringing up those memories isn't going to be such a positive thing. Hey y'all, so I have hit the halfway point into Just Like Mother, and holy hell, this book is incredibly unsettling. I should have guessed that from the cover because creepy doll head. I'm very impressed. Right out of the gate, the author does a fantastic job of showcasing both how normal the mother's cult is, but at the same time showing how something isn't quite right. Sort of just seems like they have a matriarchal, almost group family setup, but there's not any men. The story so far is pretty slow moving. It's really taking the time to explore our main character, Maeve. We see how she grew up in the cult a little bit with the flashback scenes, and then we're getting to know her in the current timeline as well. You can tell she's incredibly lonely, and she really doesn't have a place for herself anymore. We do see the relationship she had with her cousin, Andrea. The relationship between them should be so sweet and pure because they're almost like sisters. Yes, sisters fight, but I just feel like their relationship keeps getting tainted, and Maeve is aware of this, but she's also so desperate to find a family for herself once again. I think we're getting to know Maeve a lot better and really starting to understand why she acts the way she acts, why she thinks a certain way. It's interesting, but still some pretty dark implications. Overall, I just think the character writing around her has been very well done. While I do enjoy her as a protagonist, I also can't deny that occasionally I want to shake her for some of the actions she's taking. I do sort of have an idea of where I think the book is going to go from here, but things got all the more creepy once we were introduced to that damn doll. Apparently, Andrea has developed this lifelike doll that she made to try and help with her grieving process for a child she lost. Again, it's something that is so normal. I can definitely understand the positive aspects to it, but there's just something consistently going on that makes it not quite right. The way Andrea, her spouse, her best friend all act with the doll is just a little too not normal. I'm really enjoying the discussions around the role of mothers and the pressure that women are under to really embrace motherhood. Though they're not the most well nuanced, I'm not really sure if the latter half of this book is going to be as twisty as I'm hoping for it to be. Even with that, I am really enjoying this book. I am working through it quite quickly. Estimated rating, I think I'm going to go with a 4 stars. I'm liking it overall. It's pretty interesting. I actively had to make myself stop so I could record this update. Hey y'all, so I finished out Just Like Mother by heltzel. In the end, this kind of did everything I really expected it to, but overall I would still call it a fairly enjoyable read. By the end of the book, I did really like Maeve. I felt like she was a very well created character. She was very well fleshed out. I understood why she did certain things off of her background.
But even with that, I did sort of have a hard time believing she would ignore certain red flags that were popping up left and right around her cousin. With the horror elements though, I did think it was interesting, particularly after a certain event, that it did seem like Maeve was slowly starting to lose her grip on reality. Sort of seemed like she was slipping into this alcohol or drug-induced haze constantly, and with that, I like that that feeling grew and grew and grew until we finally hit the climax. On one hand, I do think that could add to my previous point, but on the other hand, I do think it could also work towards what the author was trying to do in opposition of my previous point. That was a really weird way to say that. It kind of became an unreliable narrator because it was harder for me to trust Maeve that she really understood what was going on, but at the same time there were also these totally valid reasons for why she was acting the way she was acting and why she believed what was being fed to her. The true gory elements of this book don't really kick in until the latter half. Beginning is definitely more psychological and just unsettling, but there's definitely some terrifying scenes, particularly around childbirth, which isn't super shocking given the entire premise of this book. I did expect pretty much every twist and reveal that took place, excluding the final one in like the very last chapter. I'll admit, that I didn't see coming. I also think it's one of those twists that some people are going to enjoy and some people are absolutely going to hate. While I did like the bits about the cult that we saw, I wanted more of them. There is a final element that revolves around the whole mom theme, particularly with Maeve's character, that I didn't like. I just felt like with everything that had happened, with everything Maeve has lived through by this point, that didn't make sense to either her character based on all of her experiences or her character based on everything she told us by this point. But for the most part, even though it was predictable, I did enjoy this book. Like, I did have a good time with it. It was super creepy. I did have to give this about 3.5 stars in the end. I did really like it, but it's really hard for me to rate something high when I literally call every single thing that happens in a horror book.
Darn. Already didn't get a 5-star. But that's okay, because this next one I have high hopes for as well. The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. Now, this one I've heard so many glowing reviews for. I have not read Ashley Winstead's prior thriller, but I've also heard a million positive things about it as well. In this one, we are once again following our main character, 𝗖cie, who also was in a cult when she was younger. However, once again, she has distanced herself from that and kind of reinvented herself in a new town. But when she is listening to a true crime podcast, which is actually hosted by a childhood friend of hers, and hears that he is looking into the death of her friend from college who was also involved in said cult, she ends up connecting with her childhood friend, and the two of them try to investigate this, but turns out things might be a little more connected than 𝗖cie was originally anticipating.
Hello, my beautiful peeps. So I've hit the halfway point into The Last Housewife, and holy crap and a cracker, I'm actually having to take breaks because it's that heavy. There is a lot of essay going on in this book. There are some on-page scenes. If you need them, please look up content warnings before going into this book. Please take care of yourselves. I have to say, the writing itself is a little funky because it almost feels like certain scenes are overwritten, and there are actually chapters where we are listening to what will eventually become a podcast episode. Those really mess with the flow. I like them. Sometimes they're well incorporated into the scene to transition into them, but other times they're not. It's really jarring when the character will suddenly be like, put on your recorder, I'll tell you this story, and it's very out of nowhere. Those little episodes are mostly exploring the main character's backstory and figuring out how those events tie in with the events of the investigation going on in the current timeline. And yes, they are necessary, but on the other hand, I'm not sure if this is the best way the author could have incorporated them in. I'm having conflicting feelings when it comes to the writing across the board. Since the theme of this video is cults, let's talk about the cult elements. I think they're done pretty well. They're definitely nightmare-inducing, especially because some of the rhetoric that's being used in regard to the cult definitely can be likened to a lot of real cults that exist out there, and that's just terrifying. However, at the same time, I can't help poking holes in some of the logic going on throughout this book. Our main character and her friends, when they were in college, went to what is supposed to be this like really liberal, really feminist college, and yet quite quickly they fall into line with what this man wants. They very easily easily are convinced by what he is telling them. There's like a little exploration of each character's background to sort of explain why they were perceptible to it, but honestly, I think excluding one of them, the rest just feel a little thin. I need a little bit more than that. Along with those elements though, I do think that the discussions around victimhood in this have been very interesting, and the perspective the author is looking at with it. Role manipulation plays is also very important to explore, and so I like both of those, and I think they're very interesting in how the author has presented them with this story. Our main character, 𝗖cie, is absolutely infuriating. And one thing particularly with her character that's driving me crazy in this book is the role of her husband. Her whole relationship just doesn't seem like it's really relevant to anything else in the plot. It also doesn't seem like she even really likes her husband. Her whole relationship is twisted into this thing to showcase how her trauma is still affecting her. And I totally get what the author was going for there, but I just think she went about it in a terrible way. One specific throwaway line that is utilized to showcase her husband is just as controlling as the cult leader. I don't like how any of that was handled, and this is only worsened by the fact that there's some romantic tension between 𝗖cie and the journalist friend from her childhood, Jamie. Another thing that I don't think is necessary. It really makes me wonder, like, what was the point in having 𝗖cie be married then, if you were gonna throw it away that quickly? As far as the investigation itself goes, I am intrigued. There's like a lot of things that are just very obvious conveniences. I can't help but wonder, did the author really not try and figure out a smoother way to allow these events to happen? I'm not gonna lie, I have considered DNFing this book. So with that, right now my estimated rating is roughly 3.5 stars. If there are like some really solid twists, I could see this going up in rating. I could also see a few more issues that would make this drop in rating. Hey beautiful people, so unfortunately I have ended up deciding to DNF The Last Housewife. I was about 66% in, and I just was not having a good time with this book. I really felt that the investigation just didn't really make a lot of sense. 𝗖cie was getting wrapped up in this new cult, and I just thought that every single time she would be making a step forward in the case, it was really convenient. She would go to some meeting and it's actively known by everyone she's a newbie. And yet she happens to find the individuals who will tell her exactly what she needs to know to further her case. As an individual, 𝗖cie, on the whole, I just had a very hard time rooting for. She really annoyed me, and I definitely felt like this is really admirable what she was doing here, but honestly, I think she would have been a much better help to herself if she'd just gone to therapy, and if perhaps Jamie would have gotten an actual investigator to try and work on this. But with that, there's like this one shocking element that honestly I totally figured out. I went ahead and looked it up to see if I was right, which I was. I guess that's like how the author could explain that away. There is a lot of essay in this book, a lot of it. I knew going in that this was pretty heavy. It had a lot of trigger warnings. Majority of the time, I don't think I ever really need those. I don't think the number of abuse scenes actually seen on page were necessary. They started to feel more like they were being utilized for shock value than to actually explain what the cult was doing, how they manipulate these women into doing these things, how 𝗖cie and her friends in the past were manipulated and how they were abused. Maybe the first scene I could understand, but after that, I think the author still could have gotten her point across without actually showcasing that to us. Because of those scenes, I really felt like anytime I was reading the book, it would just put me in such a terrible headspace for the rest of my day. I actively did not want to pick this book up anymore, which is why I decided that I'm going to DNF it, because I'd rather take care of my own mental health than push through with this book. Perhaps someone else would really enjoy this book. I have heard some glowing reviews for it. I just was starting to have more and more issues with this book, and it was just affecting me worse and worse as we moved on. So yeah, I did not finish this. That's a shame.
Yikes, that did not go as planned. Anyway, moving right along. This next one I was excited for because of my own experience, 𝗖cie by Catriona Ward. So I actually read Catriona Ward's The Last House on Needless Street for my 5x5 in October last year, and it was a 5-star. So I'm very excited going into this one. This is actually following the members of a cult that is set on a rural island in Scotland. They believe that a great religious apocalypse is upon them. However, only one of the members will be able to inherit the powers of their god, I guess, let's say, and little Eve is determined that it will be her. However, things get a little out of hand when a detective actually ends up traveling to the town to investigate a brutal murder.
Hey y'all, so I hit the halfway point into Little Eve and I actually got sucked into the story very quickly. Unsurprisingly, Ward's atmosphere is incredible. I thought the same on the first book I read by her. With this one, we are set at a isle in Scotland and oh my god, I can smell the sea on the air. I can feel the eerie breeze going by. I constantly feel like I'm on the precipice of something terrible about to happen around me. We alternate between two perspectives in this story. First is Little Eve in 1917. She is the second youngest child in this weird family unit that we are following. Above all others, is probably one of the biggest believers of the cultish rhetoric that is being preached at them. The family is headed by this man who she refers to as Uncle, and she is determined to not only prove herself to him, but prove herself to the snake deity that they worship. Being in her perspective is so strange because on one hand, she's really sheltered, so at times she feels really naive and young for her age, but at other points she comes across so much older because of how incredibly power hungry, sometimes is cruel in that way that children can be. It can be really unsettling. On the opposite side, we will see through the perspective of Dinah, who was the next oldest child in the family. In her perspective, we are set in 1921. All we know from the beginning is that Dinah was the sole survivor of some ritualistic killing that took place on that hamlet around the cult. We know the final events of what happened, but we don't know what led to those events. I have questions. I have theories. I am suspicious. As for the cult element, believes that the world they currently know is going to end if they please this snake deity. He will give them powers and abilities in order to live past that cataclysmic event. I'm really curious on what the basis of the cult is, because with the snake, it could certainly be an antithesis to Christianity. I guess there's also the possibility it could be tying into perhaps some sort of Scottish folklore I'm unaware of, or maybe paganism with like a basis in nature. Since this is a gothic horror story, the pacing is really slow, and I'm still fairly confused a lot of the time whenever I'm reading it, but I do think I'm putting together the events that have occurred and starting to possibly figure out what events occur between this timeline with Eve and the next timeline with Dinah. My intrigue is absolutely through the roof, but Eve's chapters are so long. I do want to keep pushing through them whenever I'm reading this, but the pacing is not the best. Right now, I would probably estimate my rating for this at about 4 stars. I am really invested. I'm very intrigued.
Hey y'all! So I have finished out Little Eve, and I have to say, first off, I was incorrect in thinking there were only 2 perspectives. There were actually many perspectives in this story. The major thing that I noticed that changed with the initial 2 I introduced at the beginning was that Dinah's perspective, which is supposed to be after the fact, later on in a timeline, some of those were actually given to us in a epistolary format, which was very interesting. I think the author did a clever job in how she incorporated that into the story and what was happening. There is also a chapter through the eyes of an investigator who is determined to try and free everybody within this cult. There are a few other points where we will see through people from the town, and those were when I realized I was having an issue with the writing style, because in those specific perspectives, the tense would shift. It bugged me here, but it didn't in Last House on Needless Street, and I think that showcases how her writing has improved, because yes, there is a beauty in her stories of being confused and trying to put together all of these pieces you're getting. I think the writing style in those sections with the confusion just kind of worsened it. Didn't really lead you into putting things together quite as much as perhaps the normal perspectives through either Eve or Dinah. On top of that, whenever there would be a shift between an outside character back to Eve or Dinah, those would be very jarring. They just weren't a smooth transition, so that would kind of take me out of the story as well. I also feel like I should mention the fact that the story is not told in a linear timeline. It jumps around a lot, and I think the author does that in a very clever way here because, again, she's able to explore the actual events and still maintain some mystery for us.
allows you an extra clue here or there to try and figure out what actually took place on this island that resulted in all these people dying. As far as the cult element goes, I was really intrigued by it at the first half, and I really wanted some exploration of it. I guess it kind of was, but it was very much a throwaway line, and that just wasn't really satisfying to me. I do think the author's explanation of how the uncle character, the leader, controlled them and manipulated them was very interesting. It was unexpected, but at the same time, it's one of those things that I can pick out actual cults that would utilize a similar thing. The pacing stayed pretty slow the entire way through, which for the most part I didn't really mind because I was so engaged in the story. I was very intrigued until maybe about 75% in. By that point, it did feel like it was starting to drag a little bit, but I do think a major reason of why I felt that way was because something was explained to us. I actually guessed that. It was probably one of my earliest guesses. I don't think it made that moment have as much impact, which is why as we are slowly starting to learn answers, I kind of was losing patience with it. I do think the finale did do some things that were unexpected, and the conclusion of the entire story is fairly satisfying. So all in all, I did enjoy this book, but my caw pile still came out to about 3.5 stars. I liked it, and I can definitely see places where Ward's writing has really improved. That gave me The Last House on Needless Street, which was a 5-star, but unfortunately this was not one.
Maybe I just need to stop saying I'm excited for these books. So on that note, next up is one that I've been planning to get to for years now. The Girls by Emma Cline. Specifically because this is actually a fictionalized retelling of the Manson family murders, and I think that is going to be particularly interesting as we are seeing through the eyes of a 14-year-old girl who is drawn into the cult, gets a lot more than she's expecting.
Hey guys, so I have not quite hit the halfway point into The Girls and was not impressed, unfortunately. I will give Cline this. She can paint a very vivid picture with her writing. More often than not, it kind of comes across like she's overwriting everything and trying a bit too hard. I do think as far as the atmosphere goes, I have been settled into 1969 in the summertime. I appreciate the fact that there was a direct reference to Helter Skelter, which is a true crime book that actually details the events of the Manson case. I actually read that a few years ago, so I'll put a link to that reading vlog up above. Those are kind of my biggest positive things about this book. I have come to the decision that I'm gonna DNF this. It feels like the story is actually gonna be much more character focused. She does come across as a very well developed character. I will give Cline that, and I do believe, in fact, that Evie could be susceptible to a cult. I cannot stand being in her perspective though. I hate being inside her head. Oh my god. It's been revealed to us that she doesn't really play a major element in the events that take place at the end of the summer. She is not there when this horrific thing happens, which makes me wonder, like, what's the point of her being the one telling this story then? Because it's supposed to be a fictionalization of the Manson family murders. Wouldn't you want to focus on a character who would actually be a part of it? The biggest reason of why I cannot stand being in Evie's perspective, she's just thinking these absolutely terrible things about every single woman around her, excluding Suzanne, the girl who introduces her to the cult. With Suzanne, she actually kind of comes across a bit obsessed with her. I appreciate Cline for trying to bring up a character struggling with their sexuality at this point in time, while on one hand she's constantly just berating women for things that she thinks makes them a victim. On the opposite side, every single male character we have met thus far falls into one of 3 camps. They are creepy, they are rude, they are downright evil. A lot of themes are being brought up in the story, but none of them were actually being explored to the full potential. I guess now looking back, I suppose Cline was kind of going for that angry at the world thing that all teenagers have at some point. That struggle of innocence lost when you're on the cusp of becoming an adult, the disillusionment you have with the real world. Personally, that time in my life was quite short-lived, and do I not want to read about it again? And then finally, my other biggest thing with this, and the scene that made me officially put it down, Cline is constantly referencing sex. Constantly. I get it, 14-year-olds are horny. You don't have to keep bringing it up with every single scene, every single character. Not only that though, there was a scene that was towing the line of statutory,
And that was completely unnecessary, added nothing to the story, only for later on SA to actually be showcased on page and then excused away by the victim? No, I'm out. That was the point where I was like, nope, I'm done. I'm DNFing this. That's disgusting. I'm not gonna read this. I had barely met the Manson equivalent. When it came to the cult elements, they just weren't really there. I DNF'd this. I'm gonna be unhauling it as soon as possible. And from all the other reviews I've looked at, does not seem that I missed anything. All right, here's hoping this last one might at least give us a single 5-star. Rouge by Mona Awad. Now, Mona Awad is another author who I have had previous experience with, and one of her books was also a 5-star. Maybe she'll close us out on a positive note. This story is following Belle, who has been obsessed with her skincare routine and trying to look young and youthful for as long as she can remember. However, recently her mother has ended up dying in a tragic way. Belle ends up interacting with a strange woman at her mother's funeral, and then shortly after receives a very weird ad for this exclusive spa that's promising outlandish results. But turns out Belle's mother was also a very dedicated member. Hey y'all, so I am just shy of the halfway point into Rouge by Mona Awad, and right from the get-go we see that our main character Mirabelle is obsessed with beauty. She is desperate to look young and beautiful, much like her mother before her, which we see in flashbacks to Mira's childhood. I have to say, as far as the writing goes around that theme, I'm very impressed at how well Awad constantly is reinforcing it in little ways. Mirabelle has an obsession with skincare products, and I do mean an obsession. She treats her skincare routine as a way to calm herself. Anytime she is speaking with somebody, she references like different regimens or different products they could benefit from using based on what she sees in their skin. When she's feeling vulnerable, she obsesses over a scar on her forehead that she has spent a ton of money trying to get rid of. We see how Mira is absolutely longing to be complimented by everybody around her. Awad even brought up colorism. Mirabelle is actually half Egyptian. She was never really able to see herself in those around her, especially in her mom, who is described as being quite pale, and yet she looks to her mom as like the most beautiful person she knows. When we see the flashbacks, how Mira's mom making these little comments, doing these small things, have imprinted on her in a way where she has picked up on the desperation to constantly be viewed as beautiful. She ties her entire value as a human being to how she's perceived, what people see in her, how gorgeous they think she is. It is heartbreaking. It is hauntingly familiar, I'm sure, for anybody who has suffered from self-esteem issues. For me, the one that I can't help thinking of due to, like I've talked about before, my thesis in college is body image. It's like a very easy one for me to tie this into. It's not quite the same, but those definitely go hand in hand. And yet, what's really fascinating is when we're seeing from Mirabelle's perspective as a child, anytime she comments about not finding herself beautiful, her mom is so fast to shut it down. When it comes to the cult elements, Mira is feeling completely lost. She one night ends up putting on her mother's shoes while she's supposed to be packing away her things, and the shoes, we're told, lead her to this absolutely beautiful house. She realizes that this is, and I'm gonna butcher the name, I'm just saying that now, La Maison de Medusa? It's talked about in a way as though Mira is not a willing participant, and yet she keeps saying yes. She keeps returning. The beauty element of the story sort of shifts the perspective on the cult, which is something I find fascinating in how Awad is handling it. Writing style in this book, it perfectly fits with my description of Awad's other books. Surreal. It is unsettling. It's like you're walking in the strangest dream, not quite a nightmare yet. The atmosphere and the narrative, the story itself is just incredibly cinematic. I'm devouring this book every time I pick it up. I'm loving it. I'm not at all surprised because Awad's stories are so weird, but I always end up gobbling them up. Right now my estimated rating is 4 stars. I would love for this to be higher than that. I have no idea because I don't even know where the story's gonna go. I have no expectation right now, but I'm loving it. Hi, I officially finished up Rouge by Mona Awad, and oh my gosh, I I loved it. She does it again. Mona Awad manages to combine a super weird, can't get your feet on the ground horror story with a scathing critique of society, and I love it. I love that about her work. Oh my God, I want to get my hands on these books physically so I can annotate them. Believe I talked about in my last update that I was really enjoying the maternal themes that were being talked about in this. I really adored how that particular theme was wrapped up at the end of this book. It is so wonderfully and terribly relatable. I loved the shift in perspective there. It was so good. It was so good. As far as the cult elements go in this, I also was all over them. I thought Awad did a phenomenal job in creating perfect mirrors between stereotypical cult and the beauty industry. For example, like the irony in both always encouraging individuality, you know, like you have your own beauty, but at the same time, we're gonna sell you all of these products that help you to look like everybody else. Everybody has their own ideal idea of beauty, and a lot of people do what they can to try and reach that. This was sold to me, and I think it's actually in the blurb, that it's like Snow White meets Eyes Wide Shut. Yes, I would say the easiest fairy tale to equate this with is Snow White, but actually there are references to multiple different fairy tales going on in the story. My CAW pile came down to 4.5 stars. In all honesty, I might just go ahead and give this 5 stars because I loved the conversations happening in this. I think if I could have annotated it as I was reading it, I would have loved it even more. We did it. I mean, it was 4.5 stars, but you know what? I don't care. We're counting it. All right, so this one was a bit of a letdown. Yikes. Maybe I don't like fictional stories of cults as much as I thought I would. But still give me recommendations for cult stories down below because hopefully there might be another 5-star in there. All right, y'all, so that's it for today. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!